The story of Japan's battleship titans is one of engineering marvel, national pride, and ultimately tragic obsolescence. These steel behemoths once ruled the waves as symbols of imperial might, only to be relegated to the depths of history by the changing nature of naval warfare. Today, we'll explore the rise and fall of these magnificent warships that defined an era. Japan's journey to naval supremacy began in the early 20th century, following their stunning victory over Russia in 1905. This triumph established Japan as a formidable naval power and ignited their ambition to build a fleet capable of challenging the world's greatest maritime nations. The Imperial Japanese Navy embarked on an aggressive shipbuilding program, determined to create vessels that would command respect across the Pacific. The Kongo-class battlecruisers marked Japan's first serious entry into the dreadnought era. Designed by British naval architect George Thurston and initially built in British shipyards, the lead ship Kongo was launched in 1912. At 27,500 tons and armed with 8 14-inch guns, she represented cutting-edge naval technology. What made the Kongo-class special was their unique combination of firepower and speed. Capable of 27.5 knots, they could outrun anything they couldn't outfight. The Japanese didn't just purchase British expertise, they absorbed it. The remaining 3 ships of the class, Hiei, Kirishima, and Haruna, were built in Japanese yards, transferring vital knowledge to domestic shipbuilders. This technology transfer would prove crucial for Japan's future naval ambitions. As the 1920s arrived, naval treaties attempted to curb the escalating arms race. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 limited Japan to a capital ship ratio of 5-5-3 compared to the United States and Britain. Rather than building new ships, Japan invested heavily in modernizing their existing fleet. The Kongo-class underwent extensive reconstructions, transforming from battlecruisers to fast battleships with improved armor protection, enhanced anti-aircraft capabilities, and more powerful engines. These modernizations gave the Kongo-class a new lease on life. By the late 1930s, they could achieve speeds of 30 knots, faster than most contemporary battleships. Their speed made them ideal for escorting aircraft carriers, a role that would become increasingly important as naval warfare evolved. The Fuso and Yamashiro represented Japan's first domestically designed dreadnoughts. Completed in 1915, these 30,000-ton battleships carried 12 14-inch guns and 6 twin turrets. Their most distinctive feature was their pagoda-like superstructure, which grew increasingly elaborate with each refit. These towering structures housed fire control systems, observation posts, and command centers, giving Japanese officers excellent visibility but creating top-heavy vessels with stability issues. Despite their impressive silhouettes, the Fuso-class ships suffered from fundamental design flaws. Their turret arrangement, with guns spread along the length of the ship, made coordinated fire control difficult. Their armor scheme, designed before the lessons of Jutland, left them vulnerable to plunging fire. Most critically, their engines were unreliable, limiting their operational range and speed. The Nagato-class, launched in 1919, represented a significant leap forward. These were the first battleships in the world to mount 16-inch guns, giving Japan a temporary advantage in naval firepower. Nagato and her sister ship Mutsu were the pride of the Imperial Navy throughout the interwar period, undergoing extensive modernizations that kept them relevant into the 1940s. What made Nagato particularly significant was her role as Admiral Yamamoto's flagship during the attack on Pearl Harbor. From her bridge, the mastermind of Japan's early Pacific victories directed operations that would shock the world. This historical significance made her a prime target for American forces throughout the war. But Japan's true battleship ambitions would culminate in the Yamato-class, the largest, most powerful battleships ever constructed. Laid down in secrecy in 1937, Yamato and her sister ship Musashi displaced over 70,000 tons fully loaded and carried 9 18 1-inch guns, the largest naval guns ever mounted on a warship. These massive weapons could hurl 3 200-pound shells over 25 miles, theoretically allowing them to engage and destroy enemy battleships before coming within range of return fire. The Yamato class represented the pinnacle of battleship design, incorporating all the lessons Japan had learned over decades of naval construction. Their armor was virtually impenetrable to contemporary naval gunfire, with a main belt 16 inches thick and turret faces 25 inches thick. Their fire control systems were state-of-the-art, and their secondary armament was formidable. Yet for all their technical excellence, these ships were conceptually obsolete before they even entered service. The attack on Pearl Harbor, which occurred just days after Yamato's commissioning, demonstrated that aircraft, not battleships, would dominate future naval warfare. The era of the decisive battleship engagement, the scenario for which Yamato was designed, would never materialize. The Pacific War quickly revealed the limitations of battleships in the age of aircraft carriers. At the Battle of Midway in June 1942, Japan lost 4 fleet carriers without their battleships firing a single main gun round. This pattern would repeat throughout the war. Massive naval engagements decided by aircraft long before surface ships could close to gun range. The Kongo-class battleships, with their high speed, found useful roles escorting carrier task forces, but even they proved vulnerable to modern threats. Hiei became the first Japanese battleship lost in World War II when she was crippled by American cruiser and destroyer gunfire off Guadalcanal in November 1942, then finished off by aircraft the next day. Her sister Kirishima met a similar fate just days later, succumbing to the 16-inch guns of the American battleship Washington in a rare night surface action. The slower battleships fared even worse. Fuso and Yamashiro were both lost in the Battle of Surigao Strait in October 1944, part of the larger Leyte Gulf engagement. In history's last battleship versus battleship action, they faced a line of American battleships, many of which had been resurrected after being damaged at Pearl Harbor. The result was a one-sided massacre, with both Japanese ships sunk without inflicting significant damage on their opponents. Musashi's fate demonstrated the vulnerability of even the mightiest battleships to air attack. During the Battle of the Sibuyan Sea in October 1944, she was targeted by wave after wave of American carrier aircraft. Despite her massive anti-aircraft battery, she was hit by at least 17 bombs and 19 torpedoes before finally capsizing. Her enormous size, once considered an advantage, simply made her an easier target for American pilots. Yamato's end was perhaps the most symbolic. In April 1945, with Japan's situation growing desperate, she was dispatched on a one-way suicide mission to Okinawa, carrying only enough fuel for a one-way trip. The plan was for her to beach herself and fight as a shore battery until destroyed. American reconnaissance aircraft spotted the task force almost immediately after it departed Japan, and on April 7th, waves of American carrier aircraft descended on Yamato. Despite putting up a fierce defense, Yamato was overwhelmed. Hit by multiple bombs and torpedoes, she eventually capsized and exploded in a massive detonation visible from 200 miles away. Over 3,000 sailors went down with her, in what amounted to a funeral pyre for Japan's battleship dreams. The fate of Japan's surviving battleships after the war was equally ignominious. Nagato, the only Japanese battleship to survive the war, was taken as a prize by the Americans and expended as a target in the 1946 nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll. Haruna, heavily damaged by air attacks while moored at Kure, was scrapped after the war. What lessons can we draw from the rise and fall of Japan's battleship fleet? Perhaps the most obvious is the danger of fighting the last war. Japan's naval planners, fixated on the decisive battle doctrine inspired by Tsushima, invested enormous resources in weapons systems that would prove largely irrelevant in the conflict they actually faced. There's also a lesson about technological transitions. The battleship era was already waning when Japan launched its most ambitious designs. While aircraft carriers represented the future, Japan hedged its bets, building both carriers and super battleships. This division of limited resources ultimately served them poorly. The human element cannot be overlooked either. Japanese naval architects and shipbuilders achieved remarkable feats with more limited industrial capacity than their American counterparts. The quality of Japanese optical equipment, for instance, was superior to American equivalents early in the war. But these advantages couldn't overcome the fundamental strategic and industrial disparities between Japan and the United States. Today, the wrecks of these once mighty vessels lie scattered across the Pacific seabed. Yamato and Musashi rest in deep water, their exact locations long mysteries until modern technology allowed explorers to locate them. Musashi was found by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen's team in 2015, resting upside down in the Sibuyan Sea at a depth of over 3,000 feet. These underwater monuments serve as reminders of both human ingenuity and the futility of war. The battleships that were once the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, symbols of national prestige and technological achievement, now slowly dissolve into the ocean from which they once drew their power. In naval museums around the world, models and memorabilia preserve the memory of these magnificent vessels. The Yamato Museum in Kura, Japan, features a massive 1/10 scale model of the eponymous battleship, allowing visitors to appreciate the sheer scale of what was once the largest warship in the world. The legacy of Japan's battleships extends beyond their military significance. They represent a pivotal moment in Japan's industrial development and national identity. The ability to design and build such complex machines demonstrated Japan's emergence as a modern industrial power. The resources devoted to their construction and the national pride they inspired speak to the central role of the Navy in pre-war Japanese society. As we reflect on these steel titans, we're reminded that even the mightiest weapons systems eventually become obsolete. The aircraft that sank Yamato have themselves been superseded by jets, missiles, and drones. Naval warfare continues to evolve, with today's surface combatants bearing little resemblance to the battleships of old. Yet there remains something compelling about these massive vessels, with their huge guns and thick armor. They represent a more tangible, visceral form of naval power than today's stealthy destroyers launching over-the-horizon missiles. Perhaps that's why they continue to capture our imagination, decades after they disappeared from the world's oceans. The story of Japan's battleships is ultimately a human story, of ambition and pride, of technological achievement and strategic miscalculation, of courage in battle and sacrifice in defeat. In their construction, operation, and destruction, they embodied the hopes, dreams, and ultimately the tragedy of Imperial Japan itself.